Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Wednesday, October 16th, and for today's headlines we have: Giant pandas from China return to National Zoo in Washington, D.C. Abortion could decide control of state Supreme Courts. Supreme Court leans towards truck driver fired over drug test. With no running water, Asheville finds other ways to flush thousands of toilets. Walgreens will close 1,200 stores, hoping for a turnaround. Giant pandas from China return to National Zoo in Washington, D.C. A motorcade through the capital revived panda diplomacy between Washington and Beijing for the first time in nearly a year. A pair of pandas from China arrived at the Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday in a revival of so-called panda diplomacy after an 11th-month pause that left countless zoo-goers disappointed by the absence of the lovable black and white pairs. After their long flight from China touched down in Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia on Tuesday morning, the two 3-year-old giant pandas, Bao Ling and Qing Bao, arrived in a police-escorted motorcade through central Washington. The bears rode in a pair of large FedEx delivery trucks bearing panda images on their sides and passed just blocks from the White House. The transfer was announced in a statement by the China Wildlife Conservation Association, which said the pandas would visit the National Zoo under a 10-year agreement. The National Zoo, which announced in May that the pandas would arrive by the end of the year, was closed on Tuesday to allow for a safe and orderly transfer of the bears. Zoo officials said the public would be able to view the pair after they complete a quarantine period. Pandas have long been one of Washington's top attractions, and excitement was already building outside the zoo on Tuesday morning ahead of their arrival. Several television camera crews, along with the amateur videographers, stalked out the zoo's entrance. Baked by Yale, a bakery across the street from the entrance, was offering panda-themed cake pops and panda black and white cookies. The zoo was left without pandas for the first time in more than 50 years, when 3 of the bears, 2 adults and their cub, left in November for a nature preserve in China's Sichuan province. Until then, pandas have been a constant presence in the nation's capital since 1972, when President Richard M. Nixon visited Beijing to establish diplomatic relations between the United States and China. During the trip, Patricia Nixon, the First Lady, mentioned her love for pandas to China's Prime Minister Zhou Enlai, who shipped a pair over 2 months later. Chinese pandas had remained at the zoo since then under a series of agreements between the two countries until the last one expired without an immediate renewal last year. The absence of pandas from the United States prompted speculation that a recent downward slide in the U.S.-China relations was to blame. Zoo officials have downplayed the idea, saying that the pandas have reached an age where they should return to China. But China's leader, Xi Jinping, suggests in a speech shortly after their departure last November that the pandas were a component of diplomacy between his country and the United States. Beijing was ready to continue our cooperation with the United States on panda conservation, Mr. Xi said during a mid-November visit to San Francisco. Mr. Xi met with President Biden during that visit, in a summit that analysts say has helped ease tensions between the countries. A pair of pandas from China arrived at a San Diego zoo in June. In Washington on Tuesday, traffic halted along Connecticut Avenue as the panda motorcade rolled into the zoo's entrance. Christian Savan, who wore panda ears on her head for the occasion, teared up as she used her phone to record the grand arrival. You know, when Mei Zhang, Tan Tan, and Zhao Xingji left, it felt like I was losing my best friends in a way, Savan said, referring to the pandas that departed last fall. You just really get to know their personality, what they like, what they don't like, their habits, like everything, she added. As of early Tuesday afternoon, the National Zoo's famed Panda Cam page was not active, but a message assured visitors that live footage would be coming soon. Abortion could decide control of state Supreme Courts. In Michigan, Ohio, Arizona, and elsewhere, progressive court candidates are hoping that the abortion issue that helped conservatives remake the federal judiciary will work for them this time. A fight over the right to an abortion has expanded into yet another corner of American political life, the races to fill seats on state Supreme Courts. An effort is underway in Arizona to oust 2 justices who voted last spring to uphold a 160-year-old ban on most abortions. In Texas, rulings by the state's highest court to sharply limit access to abortion have set off a campaign against 3 justices who are seeking re-election. And in Montana, where new justices could undo a ruling that made abortion access a constitutional right, outside money from both the left and right have turned contest for 2 court seats into multi-million-dollar elections. For decades, the issue of abortion powered conservative efforts to remake the federal judiciary. This time, progressive candidates and their backers are betting that it can be the driving force in state court races, but this time to their benefit. In 22 states, voters elect their Supreme Court justices, but all 8 of them elect justices in contests that are officially nonpartisan, though the judges' political leanings are often quite apparent. Spending on those races by partisan groups, including the National Republican and Democratic parties, is soaring. State Supreme Court elections racked up a record $101 million in spending in the 2021-22 election cycle, including $45.7 million by outside interest groups, the Brennan Center of Justice has reported. Those numbers now seem quaint. Last year, a race for one Wisconsin Supreme Court seat consumed $51 million, a national record. Republican gerrymandering of the state legislature and abortion were prominent issues on the election, which flipped the court from a conservative majority to a liberal one. Abortion is not the only issue these courts are incredibly important for, said Deirdre Schiffling, a chief political and advocacy officer at the American Civil Liberties Union. But Ms. Schiffling said abortion was top of mind for voters this year, and so the ACLU is spending $1.3 million in Montana to defeat 2 conservatives running for state Supreme Court seats. Fair Counts America, a national PAC tied to Richard Uihlein, a right-wing billionaire and founder of the Uline Shipping Supplies Company, has given $400,000 so far to the local group backing the 2 Republican candidates in the Montana court contest. The political advocacy arm of Planned Parenthood is spending $2.2 million in Montana on television and other advertising. Planned Parenthood ads in Montana and 3 other states are the organization's first in state Supreme Court contest. In past years, the group didn't have immediate need to rely on state courts. We had Roe to fall back on, said Katie Rodheim, the director of state advocacy communications for Planned Parenthood Votes. No more. In Montana and elsewhere, the state Supreme Court is really the front line for abortion access, she said. In one sense, the emphasis on abortion reflects the relentless pull of partisan politics on state courts, especially since a conservative U.S. Supreme Court began offloading authority to the states over issues like redistricting, abortion, and gun rights. But politics, even abortion politics, doesn't always sway. In Alabama, 3 justices who ignited a national debate by ruling that frozen embryos are children are seeking re-election unopposed. And in nonpartisan court elections in 2022, voters in Kentucky, Montana, and Arkansas rejected candidates with explicitly political messages and backed by outside money. At least in nonpartisan races, voters are still able to express this idea that courts are not supposed to be partisan in the same way that other elected officials are, said Douglas Keith, the senior counsel in the judiciary program at the Brennan Center for Justice. Republicans are spending money in response to the growing spending by Democrats. The National Republican Party's Judicial Fairness Initiative has said it will spend money in the same 6 states targeted by Democrats and progressives: Arizona, Michigan, Montana, North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas. Michigan and Ohio, the only 2 states where election pose any likelihood of flipping a court's ideology majority, lead the pack. Democrats hold a 5-4 majority on the Michigan court, where 2 seats are being contested, including 1 seat held by a Chief Justice, a Democrat. Both Planned Parenthood and the ACLU are spending huge sums that are issue-oriented campaigns that are certain to favor the 2 Democrats who are running. An independent PAC calls them the only Supreme Court candidates who will protect access to abortion. Fair Counts America, meanwhile, has given $500,000 to a PAC run by the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. In Ohio, Democrats would have to win all 3 seats that are being contested to reverse the 4-3 Republican majority on the court, which took a turn to the right in elections in 2022. A Republican sweep, on the other hand, would give the party a 6-1 majority. The outcomes of these contests will matter. Ohioans approved a constitutional amendment protecting abortion rights in 2023. Voters are also widely expected to approve another amendment in November that will require nonpartisan redistricting in a state Republicans have heavily gerrymandered. Disputes over the details and the implementation of both amendments are likely to come before the state's next court, with huge political implications. Ads supporting Democratic candidates stress abortion. Republican ads tried to link the Democrats to national issues like immigration and crime. But abortion and redistricting aren't the only issues tugging courts into the political arena. Voting rights, gun rights, and LGBTQ rights, all issues that resonate nationally, also are coming before states' courts. William K. Weinsberg, a prominent Ohio lawyer, is the chairman of an effort by the American Bar Association to restore confidence in American democracy and the judiciary. The perception now is that for the candidates for the highest courts, it is not just their judiciary philosophy, but their political affiliation that predicts how they will decide cases, he said. In the voting booth, Mr. Weisenberg said, "Most people don't pay attention. They just look whether it's an R or D." Supreme Court leans towards truck driver fired over drug test. The driver, Douglas Horn, sued the maker of a product said to be free of THC under a federal racketeering law, saying he had suffered a business injury. The Supreme Court heard arguments on Tuesday over whether a truck driver fired for failing a drug test after using a wellness product which was falsely advertised to be free of THC may sue the manufacturer under a federal racketeering law. The majority of the justices seem ready to side with the driver, Douglas Horn, on the narrow question before them, whether he could satisfy the law's requirement that he had been injured in his business or property. But that is not the only hurdle Mr. Horn must clear in order to win the law. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act, or RICO. There's a whole lot more to RICO than simply damages, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said, indicating that any victory Mr. Horn might win would be provisional. If the court rules for him, it will return to his case to the lower courts for further proceedings. The case, Medical Marijuana Incorporated v. Horn, number 23365, stated that after Mr. Horn came across an article in High Times, a magazine that covers the business and culture of marijuana concerning a wellness product called Dixie X. It is said to be rich in CBD, and a component of hemp that does not produce the high associated with marijuana, but to contain 0% THC, a psychoactive ingredient in cannabis. Knowing he faced random drug tests as a commercial truck driver, Mr. Horn said he conducted additional research, watching YouTube videos, visiting the manufacturer's website, and calling the company's toll-free phone number, all confirmed that the product contained no THC. After using Dixie X, Mr. Horn failed a drug test and was fired. Suspecting the product was to blame, he brought another bottle and had it tested. The testing company found it contained THC and refused to mail it back to Mr. Horn, fearing penalties under federal drug laws. Mr. Horn sued under RICO, a law that was initially aimed at organized crime and allows an award of triple damages to plaintiffs who can show, among many other things, that the defendant's racketeering activity injured them in their business or property. That phrase, the Supreme Court has said, excludes suits for personal injuries. Mr. Horn said 3 defendants, Medical Marijuana Incorporated, Dixie Holdings, and Red Dice Holdings, had engaged in a pattern of racketeering carried on through enterprise that included mail and wire fraud. A federal trial judge dismissed the suit, saying that Mr. Horn's injury was personal. The U.S. Court of Appeals of the Second Circuit disagreed, saying that the phrase business or property focuses on the nature of the harm, not the source of the harm. Lisa S. Blatt, a lawyer for the defendant, said on Tuesday that Mr. Horn's injury was unwanted ingestion of THC, which she said was a personal injury. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson disagreed. He's not claiming that he got ill because of the product, she said of Mr. Horn. He's not saying he was personally injured. He didn't even know he had he didn't even know he had ingested THC until the testing and firing. Justice Elena Kagan said the defendants were fighting on the wrong battleground. If you're harmed when you lose a job, she said, then you've been injured in your business. The better argument, though not one before the court, Justice Kagan said, was that the defendant had not caused Mr. Horn's injury directly enough to satisfy the requirement of proximate causation. Justice Clarence Thomas put the point this way: medical marijuana did not fire you. Aisha Anad, a lawyer for Mr. Horn, conceded that proving causation was a heavy burden. But Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. sounded doubtful. Would you argue that a company that advertises its product as being completely free of THC, not just that it has only such an infinitesimal amount that it's not going to get people high, but it's completely free of THC, is appealing to a category of potential customers for some reason want to make sure they don't ingest even a tiny amount of THC, he asked? And when someone who purchases the product then suffers the consequence of having a very small amount of THC in that person's system, that is entirely foreseeable result? And Anad, having raised the prospect of losing on a different ground in order to win on the one before the court, retreated. We think we're going to meet the proximate cause test, she said. With no running water, Asheville finds other ways to flush thousands of toilets. At a public housing complex, volunteers knock on apartment doors, offering assistance with an activity most of us take for granted. They carry 5-gallon buckets of water to flush the toilets of grateful residents like John Brown. I appreciate the fantastic work you guys are doing, said Brown, who is visually impaired and uses a wheelchair. More than 2 weeks after Helene, some of the most basic things are still difficult in Asheville. Drinking water in plastic bottles is everywhere, but it's hard to find water to shower or flush your toilet or even wash your hands. It's important work, and it's got to be done, said Jerry Heel, who has been flushing toilets as a volunteer with the nonprofit group Beloved Asheville since a studio in the River Arts District was destroyed by flooding from the remains of Helene. Asheville's water system was badly damaged in the storm, which knocked out major pipes connecting its reservoirs to the rest of the distribution system. There's still no estimate of when service will be restored, though it is likely a matter of weeks, not days. The lack of running water is preventing schools and most restaurants from reopening, as concerns about public health mount. That's why some citizens are taking matters into their own hands. It is an extreme health crisis looming if we don't get these toilets flushed, said El Brujol, part of a volunteer group called Flush AVL that was formed to distribute so-called gray water from ponds and wells to communities that need it. The water may not clean enough to drink, but it's ideal for flushing toilets. I don't want to get sick. I don't want my neighbors to get sick. I don't want my community to see more devastation than what we've already seen, de Brule said. So far, Flush AVL has placed dozens of giant plastic containers that hold at least 250 gallons of water each strategically around town. They're hoping to scale up in the coming days, de Brule said. Distribute hundreds of additional containers around Asheville. Well, grateful for it. Water's worth $1 million here, said Teresa Thomas, as she and her son filled up plastic containers with gray water at the apartment complex in northwest Asheville where they live. They're not the only ones who are happy to flushing toilets again. If we hadn't had this water when everything started happening, I would be busy unstopping toilets and everything, said Ronnie Marler, the maintenance man. The city and county are providing gray water too, at nearly a dozen emergency distribution sites. At Asheville Middle School, residents pull up in their cars to fill buckets and bags with gray water from a silver tanker truck. The hardest thing is keeping my commode flushed, said Loretta Smith. That's the roughest part. I got family members. It's not just me, you know, so we can't all have that sitting around like that. In the days after the storm, Asheville residents found all kinds of resourceful ways to flush. Smith says she got help from a neighbor who has a small pond. Akela Park said he's been using flood water left over from the storm. We had a flooded garage, and we used the water from the garage to flush, so seeing the blessings from the storm, Park said, just surviving. A beat-up sedan pulls up to the distribution site, and Jesus Citilan Angeles gets out. Normally, Citilan Angeles teaches 7th grade math at this school. Now he's delivering flushing water to some of the students' families. It's probably the biggest thing, that's the issue, Citilan Angeles said. Some people have no access. Some people have access to creeks, swimming pools, but there are areas that aren't near any of those things. That's why the improvised water distribution systems are going to be crucial until the taps are turned back on. Walgreens will close 1,200 stores, hoping for a turnaround. Walgreens plans to close 1,200 stores over the next 3 years, the pharmacy chain said on Tuesday. It's part of the company's plan for a turnaround as it faces retail competition and lower prescription payouts. Chief Executive Tim Wentworth said about a quarter of the company's stores are unprofitable. Walgreens has been in a $1 billion cost-cutting spree. It's already been shutting some stores, shaking up leadership, and renegotiating its deals with insurers. Walgreens, which also owns the British drug chain Boots, reported a net loss of $3 billion in the latest quarter. This was actually better than expected, with sales growing 6%. Walgreens isn't the only big pharmacy chain attempting a turnaround. Rite Aid last month emerged from bankruptcy. CVS has also closed stores and reportedly weighs a breakup to undo its mergers with the insurance company Adina and with Caremark, a pharmacy benefit manager. The convenience store part of pharmacy chains has been losing shoppers to Amazon, Walmart, Costco, grocery stores, and dollar stores. Many of those rivals also fill prescriptions, competing for pharmacy customers too. Pharmacy chains have expanded to thousands of locations over the years, signing long-term leases for pricey corner locations, but many shoppers have criticized the quality of stores, complaining about understaffing and the inaccessibility of items that are locked up to prevent theft. Pharmacies, for their part, have complained about shrinking profits for filling prescriptions, citing dramatic declines in reimbursement rates. In light of these challenges, CVS and Walgreens has looked for profits elsewhere. They've tried to add primary care clinics, a project that costs a lot of time and money. The chains have also proposed a new payout structures for prescriptions, with Walgreens on Tuesday warning that it will be willing to walk away from a line of business if it doesn't make sense. I'm very confident that over a 2 or 3 year period, we'll have reset the framework for reimbursement discussions, Walgreens CEO Wentworth told investors on Tuesday. He also added that Walgreens is focusing on adding more store brand products to its chain. That tactic has been successful for Boots in Britain, though it has not done well in the US so far. Wentworth also said the chain would work to rehire workers from stores that will close, and added that overall, many of our actions across this turnaround will take time. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.